In the previous chapter of our coverage of the Third Succession War, we looked at the infamous events of Anton's Revolt. Beginning in May 3014 and concluding 12 months later, the Second Marik Civil War would forever change the course of Free Worlds League history. Though this internal conflict overshadowed any other events to take place in the early 31st century, the rest of the Inner Sphere did not stand still while it was underway. Indeed, a review of those 2 years will help explain why they didn't take greater advantage of their enemies' self-destructive behaviour. When last we looked at matters elsewhere, First Prince Ian Davion had just been slain on Mallory's World on October 21st, 3013. He had gone to his death believing that his diversionary action would buy time for the planned assault on Halstead Station to go ahead. House Kurita had spent the past few years building a monolithic supply depot on planet that rivaled some of the largest constructed during the time of the Star League. If it could be completed, the Draconis Combine mustered soldiery could operate out of it with near impunity, making it impossible for House Davion to retain control over the surrounding systems. Holding the Terran corridor open to allow them to trade with their new allies, the Lyran Commonwealth, was of vital strategic importance. Despite the obvious value of disabling such a facility, First Prince Hansa Davion's advisors counselled him against launching the attack. They were concerned that his brother's death had crushed the morale of the armed forces of the Federated Suns, and that undertaking an offensive during a time of transition would end in disaster. They believed that the Successor Lord's top priority should be uncovering the truth behind the mystery assassin, searching for proof as to whether or not his brother-in-law Michael Hasek Davion was involved. Hansa felt differently. From his point of view, there was no time to waste on such matters. The threat that had played on his sibling's mind during his last year in office required his immediate attention. Dismissing their concerns, Davion ordered the spoiling action to proceed. The undertaking was timed to coincide with the first shipment of munitions to the supply base in order to inflict maximum destruction. Hansa's urgency came from more than just a fear of an attack from those quarters. The Ministry of Information, Intelligence and Operations had recently handed him a report that suggested the construction workers on Halstead Station had uncovered a buried university complex dating back to the Age of War, but thought lost to a nuclear detonation during the early Succession Wars. Its sealed vault promised a wealth of Star League-era knowledge. If the Federated Suns wanted to get its hands on that repository, they only had a few weeks to act. To prevent the Draconis Combine from discovering the leak, the AFFS units involved in the raid were kept in the dark as to its true purpose, focusing on the original objective of disrupting construction efforts. The task force assembled on Addix 3 crack battle mech regiments and numerous supporting conventional units, the 34th Avalon Hussars and 10th Deneb Light Cavalry, plus the unexpected addition of the Davion Heavy Guards RCT. Against the 9th Dieron Regulars alone, this was surely overkill. Notionally in command was the newly promoted Field Marshal Ran Felsner, but the final briefing revealed another twist in the tale. Despite the worrying precedent set at Mallory's World, the First Prince himself chose to participate in the assault. Perhaps he reasoned that it was safer than hanging around on New Avalon for the Duke of New Syrtis to make another attempt on his life. An elite company from the 17th Avalon Hussars would serve as additional bodyguards, captained by his trusted friend Arden Sortek. 6 weeks before the attack commenced, the Federated Sun's most eligible bachelor, Hansa Davion, began a relationship with one of the officers of the 34th Avalon Hussars, Baroness Dana Stevenson. By all accounts, the feelings they shared for each other were genuine, but somewhere in the back of the First Prince's mind must have been the knowledge that, without an heir, in the event of his death, control of the realm would pass to his half-sister, Marie Davion St. Clair, or in de facto terms, Michael Hasek Davion. A whirlwind romance culminated in a marriage proposal on Christmas Eve, the day the attack force departed from Addix. A brief stopover at Murchison would take them the rest of the way to their target. First to arrive at Halstead Station was a diversionary force consisting of 2 mercenary companies from the Crater Cobras and a third by way of Nyx Cavaliers, the same unit that had found itself wrapped up in the pursuit of Ian Davion back on Mallory's world. After popping in at a Lagrange point on December 28, 3013, they made landfall a day later, and immediately set about drawing the Dieron regulars away from Davion's main objective. Unfortunately for the Mercs, the Federated Sun's Department of Military Intelligence had made a terrible oversight. Moving to intercept them were the 2nd Proserpina Hussars, having arrived on the planet alongside the supply shipment just 1 day earlier. The unexpected 2nd DCMS Regiment caused havoc for the small battalion of raiders, and they were forced to spend the first week of the campaign running for their lives across the barren, toxic landscape. The rest of the AFFS touched down at last on January 4th, 3014. The advantage now swung in Hansa's favour. The time of their arrival had been fortuitous. The excavation of the Stali-Gira library had only just been completed. Although they secured it within a day of their arrival, the veritable warrens beneath the surface where the planet's population resided was allowing the garrison force to pop up and strike at the raiders in a totally unpredictable fashion, inflicting far heavier casualties on the numerically superior Davion troops. With their position under threat, the First Prince made the call to deny the enemy the priceless repository they both craved. Whatever couldn't be downloaded from the computer memory cores or physically dragged behind their battle mechs was torched by a firestarter. The Succession Wars had claimed another casualty, and humanity had slipped further into techno-barbarism. Despite the tragic loss, the Federated Suns still had part of the treasure, and they were determined to get it off-world. The problem was that the reinforced DCMS aerospace complement was preventing them from landing their dropships to evacuate. By repainting the First Prince's command company, the Kuritans were fooled into believing the entirety of the 34th Avalon Hussars were engaged in one of the ongoing battles. This subterfuge allowed Dana Stevenson to avoid detection and infiltrate a hostile airbase, eliminating 2/3 of the Proserpina Hussars' fighters on the ground. Before making good their escape, Hansa ordered one final attack at their enemy's command headquarters in late January, only to run face first into the fresh Second Sword of Light. Coordinator Takashi Kurita himself had come to Halstead Station. In just a few short hours, the situation completely turned against the Federated Suns. By the end of the battle, they had just 6 mech battalions remaining to the Combine's 10. Their supporting conventional armor and infantry regiments had sustained less damage, but were prevented from fighting on the surface by the planet's poisonous atmosphere. Compounding their issues was a chronic shortage of ammunition. Reinforcements were racing towards the planet, but were still a week away. Devising a plan to rearm before then, Dana was breveted colonel, and her battalion was sent underground to escort the armor brigade to seize the old supply depot the Kuritans had been working to replace. The First Prince, meanwhile, would lead what was left of the rest of his command towards the Madison Plains. They arrived on February 3rd, But again, the Draconis Combine was able to use the tunnel network to get ahead of them, the Sword of Light Regiment cutting Davion off from both viable landing zones and surrounding the AFFS. Only the sudden re-emergence of Stevenson's task force from beneath the surface opened a gap in the DCMS lines long enough for the FedSun survivors to exfiltrate. Tragically, it was an effort which cost Hansa's fiancée her life. Her sacrifice had bought enough time for the reinforcements to reach them, however, with both the 36th Avalon Hussars and 1st New Iverson Chasseurs descending on their beleaguered companions' location just in time. Although the hostile regiments were driven off, what was left of the original assault force was in too poor shape to contest control of the world. They withdrew at once, reaching Silene by February 7th. Miraculously, Nyx Cavaliers had survived where so many others had fallen, their unit now at full company strength after absorbing the last remaining lance of Crater Cobras. Though the losses were significant, and deeply personal to the First Prince in the case of Dana Stevenson, the raid on Halstead Station was nonetheless a success. In time, others would give Hansa Davion the epithet Victor at Halstead Station, oblivious to the painful memories it conjured. Despite everything that the Davion family had been through over the last 3 months, their ordeal was far from over. In the aftermath of the raid on Halstead Station, Taisa Harrison Ukita of the Draconis Combine's internal security force discovered the piles of burned books actually held at their core a number of untouched manuscripts where the flames had not been able to penetrate. He had the salvageable works loaded aboard his dropship and transferred them to neighbouring Murchison. News of this discovery reached the desk of the scheming Michael Hasek Davion, who saw an opportunity to share in his brother-in-law's fame. In April 3014, he dispatched a battalion of the Kellhounds on a secret mission. Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Kell spent the next 3 months searching for the collection, but to no avail. When a regiment of the Dieron regulars arrived, the mercenaries left in a hurry, or so the DCMS thought. Having returned to Luthien, Takashi Kurita was looking to get even for the defeat at Halstead Station. Back on February 5th, Field Marshal Aaron Sandoval, Lord of the Draconis March, had travelled with his 1st Robinson Rangers to bolster the defence of Mallory's World, as if goading the Coordinator to come and get him. Another showdown between the Draconis Combine and Federated Sons was imminent. The Murchison garrison promptly departed the system to prepare for the renewed assault, leaving only a single company behind. Believing that the danger posed by the Kellhounds had passed, Harrison Ukita retrieved the secreted tomes and again loaded them aboard his private transport so that they could be moved to more secure territory. The ISF officer never got to enjoy the fruits of his labour. Patrick had in fact remained on planet, hunting for the lost books incognito, and his battalion was camped out in the mountains awaiting his signal. With assistance from a sympathetic local known as the Little Dragon, the two of them were able to kill the Taisa and call in the cavalry. His soldiers flooded into the compound and captured the valuable research material. The commandeered Kuritan dropship became the latest addition to the powerful mercenary regiment. Raids such as these kept Mallory's World safe throughout much of 3014. The Draconis March Lord had taken charge of operations on the ground, where the survivors from the prior battle were still recuperating. General Eugene Drivers, whose reckless actions had been partially culpable for the former First Prince's demise, had nonetheless been reassigned to command the prestigious 4th Davion Guards RCT. The presence of the 17th Avalon Hussars and Kellhounds meant the garrison totaled a formidable 4 regiments, although only the Robinson Rangers were at full strength. To crack this nut, the coordinator dispatched the hero of the Third Battle of Mallory's World, Taisa Yorinaga Kurita, in command of his own Second Sword of Light, alongside the 24th Dieron regulars. Aaron Sandoval had an advantage on paper, but the damage they had sustained from the previous year meant the two sides had a rough parity. The mustered soldiery returned to Mallory's World on December 5th, 3014. The Planetary Duke was able to get both commanders to agree to restrict combat to the already despoiled landmasses, leaving the sole remaining arable continent of New Helen safe from the coming conflagration. This still left several of the largest population centres on dangerous ground. In reality, this was more a grudge match between two great adversaries than it was a contest over resources. Initially, neither side sought to engage the other. They simply reinforced their defensive line and called for assistance. The next wave of DCMS arrivals touched down on May 7th, 3015, in the form of the 9th Benjamin Regulars and rebuilt 2nd Legion of Vega, whereas the AWFS either couldn't or wouldn't send more reinforcements. Hansa Davion's focus had shifted to another front. With the Marik civil war still ongoing, Maximilian Liao had been able to devote his sole attention to his Corward border. Unfortunately for him, things had not been going well there. As if to assure the Chancellor that he had not been forgotten in the changeover, Hansa Davion ordered an attack on the St. Ives Commonalty capital soon after returning from Halstead Station. Numerous units came to its defence, but the First Prince doubled down. The Federated Sons adopted a policy of no war, no peace, whereby they would conduct a low-level raiding campaign to prevent the Capellan Confederation from being able to go on the offensive. For the most part, it succeeded. The only notable strike of 3015 was on Kava 5, but this was far from the last time that planet was hit that decade. Anton's revolt came to an end with the surrender of the last rebel holdouts in May of that year. The fragmented realm was in a desperately poor shape following the Civil War, secluded in their corner of the inner sphere, licking their wounds. This was exactly the situation Maximilian had been hoping to create when he instigated the conflict. Regardless of which Marik brother came out on top, the threat to his back was significantly reduced. Unable to match the AWFS with his own CCAF, Liao sought a different solution. His scheme with the Duke of Procyon had completely gutted the Freewells League at almost no cost to the Confederation. Why not try to replicate that success elsewhere? Such plots would have to wait, however. The Freewells League military was broken, but not defeated, and even managed to cause enough damage to the Blackwind Lancers during their raid on the Elnath system that the regiment needed to be taken off the front line while they conducted repairs. To handle this minor nuisance, Liao assigned his premium mercenary unit to the task, the Big Mac. Archie McCarran dispatched in turn the Armoured Cavalry's 2nd Regiment to replace the planetary garrison, helmed by Colonel Marcus Barton. This was to be his first outing as regimental commander, and he quickly traced the source of the trouble to the planet Orenson. The world's fortified spaceport was going to be difficult to overcome, but Marcus's heavy mechs were up to the challenge. Though the outnumbered Marik defenders gave as good as they got, they were ultimately forced to abandon the supply stockpile they had been guarding. The Mercs lifted off with holds full of loot. Archibald struggled to see this as a victory, as a full battalion of the MAC were wiped out in the effort. But Barton avoided reprimand by virtue of the Chancellor publicly praising his efforts. The FWLM attempted to get their own back the following year, but the Big Mac swatted away the attack on LaSalle with relative ease. The standoff on Mallory's World continued throughout 3015, but the Draconis Combine Mustard Soldiery was busy elsewhere. Their main effort that year was focused around the conquest of Mara, where regulars from both the Benjamin and Lyran military districts had to work together to achieve a victory. Assigning an objective to multiple of his warlords was one of Takashi Kurita's preferred ways of ensuring that those powerful individuals remained in competition with each other and not challenging his own position at the top of the pyramid. It often paid off handsomely on the field as well, as the Taishus spurned their warriors towards greater acts of heroism in an effort to outperform their rivals. So it was on Mara, where Benjamin's Ukita Yoryoshi defeated a force that was pinning down 2 regiments of Lyran regulars with just a single battalion of his own. His fellow warlord tried to deflect from his embarrassment by accusing Ukita of forsaking the plan the coordinator had drawn up, but the successor lord was only interested in results. There was no doubt that Yoryoshi's star was rising. The Lyran Commonwealth had been one of very few major powers within the Inner Sphere not to have had an active hand in instigating Anton's revolt, but they took greater advantage of the situation than perhaps any other. A slew of raids throughout 3014 had netted them a great bounty of parts and supplies. A single retaliatory strike against Thorin by the defenders of Andurian in the months that followed barely registered. Over the next 3 years, the 2 realms would trade ownership of Ford and Magrez back and forth, but this was still a clear net positive for Steiner. It was a very different story within the Kuritan theatre. Along that border, Carlyle's commandos were defeated in the Battle of Dahlgren, and then another rout at Harvest the following year forced them to concede Verdandi too. Their own armed forces were focusing all of their energy on retaking Severin in 3016, a world that had changed hands more times than perhaps any other during the Third Succession War. This venture seemed like it too was doomed when a trio of Razelhaig regulars redeployed to the system. Katrina Steiner was determined not to give in. She emptied several of the surrounding worlds of their garrisons to match the mustered soldiery on Severin, but unfortunately, this was exactly what Kurita had planned for. The DCMS troops reboarded their dropships and departed for other targets in the region. Laurent should have been the first of many conquests for that task force, but an unwavering planetary militia and a single LCAF battalion put up such stubborn resistance that the attack had to be called off. Against the odds, the Archon got our victory. Severin once more belonged to the Lyran Commonwealth. December 23rd, 3015 marked a momentous occasion in the history of the Succession Wars. That evening, First Prince Hansa Davion hosted a grand triumph outside the capital city of the Federated Sons, as part of the cornerstone laying ceremony for the new Avalon Institute of Science. This represented the first significant step in mankind's difficult journey out of the technological quagmire they had been drowning in for the past century and a half. The basis of this university's advanced curriculum was the recovered Star League database, which had come to be known as the Halstead Collection. The information contained within made possible a number of breakthroughs in a diverse range of subjects, such as biology, medicine, engineering, metallurgy, chemistry, finance, political administration, and military science, as well as allowing broader discussion on topics like literature, economics, and philosophy. Most intriguing of all were the volumes that contained research on water purification, myomer production, and computer design, much of which was branded with the moniker Lost Tech. Construction on the university was completed in 3016. When the first class enrolled later that year, they became the greatest concentration of scientific geniuses anywhere outside of the Sol system. This shift in focus for the Federated Sons away from war and towards academia spawned similar copycat ventures in each of their rival successor states, though none could match the depth of knowledge now being taught at the NAIS. With their own technical colleges underperforming, the other great houses turned to more insidious methods of achieving parity. Infiltrating the complex to learn its secrets became top priority for every Inner Sphere intelligence agency, not to mention ComStar as well. In previous eras, the Primus might have launched something akin to Operation Holy Shroud to prevent the dissemination of this much forbidden knowledge to those outside of the Sacred Order, but Julian Tiepolo was less troubled by its existence than some of his predecessors would have been. ROM endeavoured to secure access to the Institute's databases, but all three of their agents failed to make it more than a couple weeks before discovery or death. It seemed the MIIO was just as enthusiastic about rooting out spies in their midst as their foreign counterparts were in gaining entry to the facility. The arrival of the 36th Dieron regulars on Mallory's World on January 2nd, 3016 was the crucial tipping point the DCMS had been waiting for. After more than a year of preparation, Yorinaga Kurita at last began his advance against the enemy's defensive line. There was more than just the honour and glory of the Draconis Combine at stake. The Taisa had a personal vendetta to satisfy. The timely arrival of the Kellhounds had prevented him from claiming Ian Davion's dead body back in 3013, and thereby achieving ultimate victory. To ensure the mercenaries' complete destruction, each of their 2 mech battalions was confronted with at least 3-to-1 odds, an overwhelming force they couldn't hope to stand against. Every unit was engaged simultaneously on January 31st. The battle for the capital of Coulterville commenced when the 24th Dieron regulars performed a combat drop on top of the defending Avalon Hussars. Though the location of the enemy's battle mechs was well known, their conventional forces and those of the Malorian militia were scattered throughout the ruins. Taisho Simlin Toshirov found himself mired among the rubble. To the north, the city of Harrison's Ferry became the site of another battle between the Duke of Robinson and Taisho Shiro Weihu's Benjamin regulars. Scouts spotted the approaching forces early, allowing the AFFS to engage them away from the civilians on the plains beyond the suburbs. Taisho Harukichi Hyakutake led the Combine's dregs into combat against the unit that had exterminated the Legion of Vega 2 years prior. This second contest did not promise to go any better. The Kellhound's 2nd Battalion were fighting a desperate delaying action against the 36th Dieron regulars while their non-combatants embarked their dropships. Taisho Raizo Tanaka was also out for blood after his unit had been humiliated by the Mercs back on Murchison. The 2 Kell brothers, meanwhile, were being hunted by the Mustard Soldiery's finest, the 2nd Sword of Light. Cornered at Reservoir 13, the Colonel could see that the end was near for his unit. There was just one chance to save the lives of his friends and family. Accepting death, Morgan Kell stepped forwards towards the enemy line and offered his opponent a chance at single combat. a duel that Yorinaga Kurita was honor-bound to accept. Both leaders were of exceptional skill, piloting battle mechs of equal tonnage, but the coordinator's cousin had just the slightest edge in his gunnery skills, an advantage he used to best the Lyran native. Exactly what happened next is contentious, with numerous first-hand accounts from those present differing on the details. The mercenary archer was forced to its knees just as the Taisar triggered his full array of weapons to finish it off. Miraculously, every single shot went astray. Some over-imaginative folk say the Colonel's mech became like a phantom, the PPC blasts literally phasing through it without causing injury. Morgan struggled upright and blasted his rival with a salvo of LRMs, too close for their warheads to arm. Nevertheless, the impact threw off Yorinaga's aim just as he unleashed another full alpha strike, the deadly fire again sailing harmlessly past his target, even at point-blank range. The inevitable result was a heat overload that automatically shut down the machine. Rather than exploit this situation, Kel coaxed his own mount into performing a deep bow towards the vanquished enemy, acknowledging Kurita's superior talents, and thereby conceding the bout. He remained stationary until his adversary had powered back up. This time, it was the Combine officer who bowed. In a shocking broadcast, he ordered all DCMS units to cease combat operations and return to their dropships. When another of the Sword of Light MechWarriors challenged his authority, the Taisar opened fire on his own subordinate. Most of the AFFS troops were happy to let them leave unmolested, but the fanatic Robinson Rangers harried them all the way. They lifted off Mallory's World on February 2nd, 3016. Why did Yorinaga act in this way? Many people believe that in that moment where he failed to vanquish his foe, he came to recognize that he had not shown his counterpart in the duel appropriate respect. His actions had been driven by bloodlust and a desire for vengeance, both traits unbecoming of the noble samurai Kurita saw himself as. Though the mercenary had been bested on the field, it had been a triumph for the Colonel in the Battle of Wills. Thus, having lost the bout, at least in his own mind, he withdrew from the victor. To press the attack after such a defeat would have been the greatest dishonor imaginable. Regardless of his reasoning, the consequence of this action was grave. The Combine's great hero, slayer of the Hound Ian Davion, was a pariah. The coordinator stripped him of his rank and banished him to a monastery on Echo 5. Yorinaga was only spared execution on account of his famous last name, and Takashi Kurita has continually rejected his requests to commit seppuku to atone for the disgrace ever since. Despite their astonishing victory, the Kellhounds did not escape unscathed either. Something about the experience had changed Morgan irreparably. Over the next 6 weeks, he set about dismantling 2/3 of the regiment, reducing it in size to just one mixed battalion. In the aftermath, Kell went on his own self-imposed exile to Zanaya, where he still resides at St. Marinus House to this day. This terrible and inexplicable period in their history became known as the defection amongst those who lived through it. Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Kell continued to lead what little was left of the unit, but it was a shadow of its former self. Following their defeat during Anton's revolt, Wolf's Dragoons took advantage of the amnesty offered them by Captain General Janos Marik and set about rebuilding their shattered regiments. By the end of the Civil War, Each one of their frontline units was operating with just 2 battalions, and some of the smaller commands were only at half strength. Going to work for the Free Worlds League began a chapter in their history the mercenaries came to euphemistically refer to as their cattle raiding period, a time marked by numerous small unit actions across the border. June 3016 saw the first major undertaking during their tenure with House Marik. Beta and Delta regiments were dispatched to pin down 2 of the LCAF's best on Wyatt, while other friendly units conducted smaller raids in the region. Though this was a strategic success for League Central Coordination and Command, locally the hard-fought battle ended in a draw. The Mercs had underestimated the Lyran Commonwealth armed forces, whose upper echelons are notoriously rife with posers and blowhards, the infamous social generals, but whose frontline officers are as competent as any other nations. In their retreat from the planet, an entire battalion was destroyed when their overlord dropship was shot out of the sky, a terrible loss for the still injured Wolfpack. Colonel Jeremy Ellman chose to resign his commission in the aftermath, going to work for their training command. Other Dragoon-led raids took place later that year. Beta, now under the command of Colonel Andrei Shostakovich, hit New Kyoto, Delta struck at Summer, and Zeta Dixie. Here, the Mercs lost their second colonel of 3016, when Mary Terrell was killed in action, control of the elite assault battalion passing to Simpson Pollock. In the wake of their victory at Mallory's World, the Kellhounds were perceived as damaged goods. The Federated Sons opted to let them exit their contract early, but not even the Lyran Commonwealth wanted the mercenaries back. Whereas before they possessed 2 crack BattleMech battalions, now they had but 1 company, plus another of jump infantry and a flight of aerospace fighters. Patrick Kell took this as a sign that his older brother did not think him capable of running anything larger, and refused to expand it back up to its former glory. The Free Worlds League was desperate to plug the gaps left in their line by the Civil War, and so gladly offered the Kellhounds a position hunting pirates along the Periphery. The surviving members of the group took to this task with relish, defending Tematagi in 3017, at last shaking off the malaise that had come over their leader. Later that year, the Legion of Honor raided the backwater world of Mankova. When the mercenaries came to its defense, the devious Gorman Toth informed them of another pirate raid against the more industrious Bismarck he had timed his own venture to coincide with. The Kellhound's jumpship swiftly departed. What the bandits failed to realize was that the Mercs had not gone with it, ambushing the Legion soon after while they hunted for an illusory supply depot. Meanwhile, the empty jumpship loudly broadcasted its arrival at Bismarck. Believing they were in imminent danger, Hassan Hiss ordered his own crew to abandon the raid before any serious damage could be done. These actions went some way to restoring morale within the Kellhounds and confidence in the unit among other potential employers. "3017 saw a rather peculiar confrontation between 2 enigmatic rivals, Jamie Wolfe and Cranston Snord. On the planet Lorik, their 2 units faced off, although only a few lances of the enormous Dragoon Brigade were present. In this instance, the Irregulars came out on top, winning themselves control over a small Star League supply cache in the effort. Cordial relations were maintained. The captured MechWarriors returned to their base on Sterling without incident. Despite this success, Snord's homecoming later that winter was not a happy one, as they discovered that in their absence, the Free Worlds League had razed their famous museum on Clinton and absconded with much of its contents. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that this was an operation specifically requested by Captain General Janos Marik as a means of getting back at the troublesome unit that had caused him so much grief over the last decade. Of course, this latest provocation only fanned the flames hotter among the eccentric mercenaries, who immediately set about plotting their revenge. The culmination of these plans was the Junkyard Dog affair. 3 months of intelligence gathering had pinpointed the location of their stolen goods, the planet Nathan. Katrina Steiner signed off on the vendetta, which commenced with the arrival of Snord and his band of followers on March 18, 3018. The merchandise was being stored or flogged at various locales across the world, requiring the irregulars to split up into individual lances. 2 weeks of hit-and-run tactics were enough to reclaim most of the booty, at which point Cranston called an end to the first stage of the operation before a relief effort could be mobilized against them. Said reinforcements were already on their way from Oliver, but this development did not escape the notice of the Lyran Intelligence Corps. Steiner immediately launched an attack of her own against the planet, taking advantage of the weakened garrison there. Snord, meanwhile, had done the unexpected. Rather than race for the border, he headed deeper into the Freewells League, reappearing at Holt. In a brief skirmish, Jason Marik Torrenson, third cousin to the Captain General, was taken captive. Against all odds, the irregulars successfully made it back to Clinton on July 15th. Regrettably, the unit had suffered considerable damage on the campaign, and a large percentage of their reclaimed artifacts had to be auctioned off in order to pay for repairs. Their prisoner was transferred to Tharkad and later ransomed back to the Marik family. Though this was great propaganda for the Lyran Commonwealth, it had minimal strategic impact, and the LCAF regulars' own effort to reclaim Magrez was less successful. A raid on Angel II the following year showed more promise, seeing strong support from the local populace, but its location in the Freewells League interior meant it was never a realistic target for conquest. Candice Liao, Duchess of St. Ives, was leading an invasion force to Spiker in 3017, intent on liberating the former Confederation holding from their mortal enemy's clutches. Though many were skeptical of the Capellan heir's suitability to command such an operation, she quickly proved them wrong by outmaneuvering the 5th Davion Guards RCT and threatening to overrun their headquarters. Her ambitious plan was thwarted by the actions of a lowly lieutenant aboard a blackjack on the opposing side, Justin Allard. He was able to get the best of Candice, forcing her to eject from her Vindicator, but as she did so, the system fouled and caused her terrible injuries. This turned the tide of the campaign on Spiker, and the invaders were forced to retreat. The wounds Liao sustained were so significant that she would never pilot a battle mech again. This marked the beginning of a low period for the Capellan Confederation, in which they found themselves becoming the Inner Sphere's favourite punching bag. A CCAF strike on Hassad succeeded in raising the ire of the Freewells League. After being largely dormant for the past few years, the FWLM went on the offensive, capturing the planet Jasmine and also hitting Carver 5 within the next few months. The residents on that world were subjected to another humiliating raid the following January, this time by the AWFS. The Federated Sons intensified their actions after this, averaging one a month throughout 3018, keeping Liao on the defensive. Almost all of the attacks that were plaguing the Confederation came as a result of the other successor states offering contracts that gave their hirelings almost complete freedom to choose their targets, as long as they attacked something. The next year saw the Confederation's losses continue, this time when Gudna fell to House Marik. It was warrior houses Kamata and Lusan who were at last able to stop the hemorrhaging by eradicating the mercenary nuisance sent by Davion to plunder St. Ives. After the complete destruction of 2 whole companies, the other small bands scaled back their aggression. Smithson's Chinese bandits were a full regiment, however, now in the service of the First Prince. They were assigned to scout out the dropship repair facility on the Chromo, and came close to capturing the base. But the battalion of McCarran's armoured cavalry defending the compound were able to overcome 2-to-1 odds and beat them back. Anton's revolt had a lasting effect on the Marik family. The civil war had pitted brother against brother, but also son against son. Nor was there any unity among the survivors after that terrible conflict. Their critics in Parliament looked at them and saw nothing but a failing dynasty. It was no wonder that Andurian's calls for independence and Regulus's demands for new leadership only intensified as the Third Succession War drew to a close. The worst incident came in 3018. Martin Marik, Janosch's firstborn son, was assassinated. The perpetrator has never been identified, but everyone assumes it was one of his own kin. Next in line was his brother Duggan, making him the most probable culprit, but certainly there were others who might have been responsible. Their cousin Duncan had seen his own influence grow after the cessation of hostilities, later rising to the post of Supreme Commander of the Marik Militia. When the Captain General refused to name an heir, he began to openly declare that it was he who would succeed his uncle when the time came. The spectre of another civil war loomed on the horizon. May 18th, 3018 marked graduation day for the Sunzang MechWarrior Academy within the Draconis Combine. These were the absolute creme de la creme of mustard soldiery candidates, frequently exhibiting absolute fanaticism in their beliefs. That year's top student was someone of particular note: Theodore Kurita, son and heir to the Coordinator of Worlds. Takashi had travelled to Kagoshima in person in order to give the Shosa his first commission, a battalion within the Anting Legion, but notably had been absent during the actual ceremony. To say the pair had a strained relationship would be an understatement. The young officer found it impossible to meet his father's expectations. Any success was dismissed as undue favoritism from his tutors. The fact that Theodore had turned out as well as he had was in large part thanks to his other friends and relatives. In many ways, he was the product of the entire Kuritan dynasty working together to forge him into the strongest of their clan. Tradition prevented them from openly criticizing the successor lord for his treatment of the heir, but those powerful allies would always back his corner, even if they had to work in the shadows. One such individual was Subhash Indrahar, director of the Internal Security Force and trusted companion of Takashi Kurita. Though the pair may have been close friends, the intelligence chief did not disclose everything to his master. The evening before graduation day, he had dispatched agents to feign an attack on Theodore. Despite being outnumbered 6-1, the MechWarrior had been able to gain the upper hand. Before any serious injury could be done, Subhash intervened and explained the deception. Those who had chased the heir through the streets were members of a secret society distinct from the ISF, and this was a final test of the students' capabilities. The group called themselves the Sons of the Dragon, individuals dedicated to preserving the ruling family's lineage, more than just carrying out the whims of whoever currently sat atop the chrysanthemum throne. They believed that a Kurita would one day succeed in reunifying all of mankind, if not through conquest, then via some other means. The night's escapade had convinced Indrahar that was the destiny of the man standing before him. He extended Theodore an invitation to join, one which he accepted, thereby gaining access to the highest level of support from the internal security force. Another of the Shosar's allies at court was his great-aunt Florimel Kurita, keeper of the House Honor. To celebrate his outstanding performance at Sunzang, she offered her grandnephew an auspicious gift fitting for the future ruler of the Draconis Combine. A few years earlier, a salvage team picking over an asteroid junkyard within the New Samarkand system had made a remarkable discovery. Mixed in with the detritus left behind by the Star League Exodus fleet was the personal battle mech of Commanding General Alexander Kerensky himself. Though in a terrible state of disrepair, Florimel had the machine fully refurbished and made operational once more. Kurita took the Orion with him to his first posting along the Lyran Commonwealth border. At the dawn of 3019, the Marshal of Dieudonné proposed an audacious scheme to league central coordination and command that sought to remedy several pressing matters at once. Wolf's Dragoons were nearing the end of their employment. The suspicion was that they would soon depart for another successor state, as they had at the conclusion of their two prior contracts. Very soon, they would become a weapon in the arsenal of one of their enemies. Furthermore, the Lyran Commonwealth already had a strength advantage over the Free Worlds League. Even if the mercenaries restricted themselves to operations along the Kuritan front, it would still allow the LCAF to redeploy some of their regulars to face off with Marik. Therefore, Wolf's Dragoons were given the impossible task of doing what no other force in history had managed: destroying the factories of Hesperus. Either they would succeed in crippling the Steiner manufacturing hub, suffer such debilitating damage themselves that they would surely be unable to sign another contract for at least a few years, or die in the attempt, and spare the Free Worlds League from having to pay them. It was a win-win-win. Janos Marik approved the order. Though his colonels warned him against accepting the mission, Jamie Wolfe did exactly that. Virtually the entire armada departed in mid-January, leaving no more than 2 battalions behind to guard their base on Stirling. En route to their primary objective, Zeta and Natasha Kerensky's independent company, renamed the Black Widows in the years since Anton's revolt, struck at targets of opportunity while the JumpShips recharged, keeping the large unit fully stocked as they prepared for the mass assault. Only on Le Mans did the 17th Arcturan Guards hand them a defeat, albeit one that was short-lived. Simpson Pollock fell in battle like every other Zeta colonel before him. His successor, Elliot Jameson, would lead the battalion throughout the remainder of the campaign. The Arcturans had to rapidly fall back when the rest of the mercenary brigade came to their aid. By the time they arrived at their final destination on June 6, 3019, Wolf's Dragoons were as well prepared as they possibly could be for the upcoming 13th and to this day final battle for Hesperus. Alas, the news that awaited them was not positive. A spy within the Atrian court had leaked word of the upcoming attack to the Lyran Intelligence Corps. Every available unit was rushed to reinforce the 6th and 15th Lyran Guards in garrison. Their compatriots from the 24th, the 3rd Royal Guards, the nascent Hansen's Rough Riders, and Xi'an Hotheads all combined to bring the total complement up to 6 BattleMech regiments. Against such stiff opposition, the Dragoon advance was painfully slow. Jamie Wolfe had to ground his first reserve unit, Delta, almost immediately to help the 3 lead elements break out of their isolated landing zones. Soon, Epsilon and the various supporting battalions were engaged in the surface battle too. After weeks of bitter fighting, all 12 regiments worth of mechs were drawn up on opposite sides of the Erewhon River, just 50 kilometers from the Millau mountain complex. The initial crossing was attempted on June 22nd, but the Lyrans gave no ground. This became just the first of 10 such efforts over the next 2 days to end in failure. Colonel Harold Jones of Epsilon, the only unit to have established a short-lived beachhead, was killed when aerospace fighters dropped bombs on his position, forcing the rest of his command to fall back. It was Captain Natasha Kirensky who ultimately found the weakness in the Lyran defense. Crossing at night on the 23rd, her breakthrough was quickly followed up by Delta and Epsilon rushing in behind the Black Widows. Just as their detachment got within sight of their objective, Hansen's Rough Riders cut off their approach and again fought the already battered Dragoons to a standstill. By the 26th, their situation had become desperate, and Jamie Wolfe ruefully gave the order to retreat. They were harried all the way to their dropships, but ultimately, the LCAF could not prevent their departure. A full third of the brigade was destroyed during the campaign, losing in 1 month losses equivalent to that which they had sustained during Anton's revolt. Here at last, Wolfe's Dragoons fell back on their ace in the hole, a supply run to whatever hidden periphery redoubt they operated from. A 6-month voyage saw them return to the Inner Sphere with enough replacement battlemechs to fully refit their regiments. The shortage of mech warriors was a trickier problem, however. Until this point, the Dragoons had almost exclusively hired from within their own ranks, with many of their children entering the roles whenever a parent fell in battle. Now though, they were forced to accept applicants from beyond their family unit. Again, the successor state intelligence agencies tried to plant one of their own into the shadowy organization, but every agent was uncovered and turned away. ComStar, more than any other, was left bitterly frustrated by their failure to both track or infiltrate the group. All 3 of their ROM agents immediately recognized for what they were, adding further credence to the rumors that Wolfe's Dragoons possessed some unknown advanced technology that allowed them to see through any facade. Trouble was brewing within the Razelhague military district. A scheme was underway that, if carried out to completion, would spell the end for the ruling dynasty. The tyrannical edicts of Coordinator Hohiro Kurita had roused an insidious serpent, that of an independence movement. Although the ISF had attempted to crack down on this group after he had been slain by one of their number, they still festered beneath the surface. Chief among the plotters of the Free Razelhague Underground were the civilian governor of the region, Jarl Otto Sjovold, in league with the even more powerful Taishu Marcus Kurita, first cousin to the ruling Takashi. Together they made plans for new leadership within the Draconis Combine, a realm that would soon lose its grasp over the ancient principality it had conquered some 7 centuries ago. Despite their common cause, each foresaw a different future for themselves. Marcus, of course, wanted to rule the successor state, but Otar intended to place the more pliable Theodore Kurita onto the throne. Through an arranged marriage to his daughter Anastasi Sjovold, he believed he could win his consent for a Razelhague breakaway state, while his grandchild would go on to rule the neighbouring territory. 7 others were involved in the plot, the most powerful of which was the man known as the Red Duke, Halstead. He had his own ambitions in the region, believing that he would be best placed to rule whatever rump military district arose in Rasalhague's place. 3019 saw relatively little action along either of the Draconis Combine's borders. The only notable challenge came from the 7th Crucis Lancers. They exploited the lack of coordination among the DCMS following the appointment of Grieg Samsonov to the position of Warlord of the Galadan district. A raid on Fallon 2 saw the tiny McKinnon's raiders score a victory over the planet's much larger multi-regimental garrison, whereas the rest of the unit almost succeeded in wiping out the Taishu's 5th Galadan regulars before the 8th were able to come to their aid. Other engagements in the vicinity of Harrow's Sun were less conclusive. On September 22nd, 3019, the day before the royal wedding, Takashi Kurita was racing towards the capital aboard the personal dropship of Taisho Vladimir Ivan Sorensen, commander of the 8th Rasalhague Regulars. As the son of the former district warlord, this gave him a claim to Marcus's current title, and that made him a threat. Looking to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, Kurita was all too happy to give him the honour of collecting their coordinator from the jump point. Unbeknownst to the rest of the conspirators, the Taishu had also arranged for Theodore and the Red Duke to be summoned to the spaceport. Urgent efforts on the part of the governor to prevent his future son-in-law's departure were unsuccessful. As the dropship was on final approach, a bomb detonated aboard the vessel. All escape pods were jettisoned, and both its speed and bearing were locked into the flight controls. The craft was on a collision course with the terminal. In one stroke, both senior members of the Kuritan family would be eliminated. In spite of all his efforts, Marcus's master plan failed to come to fruition. Aboard the careening dropship, Ivan was able to mount his grasshopper along with the coordinator and blast their way free of the hull, making a chaotic but survivable descent by means of jump jets, while the Jarl evacuated Theodore aboard his VTOL moments before impact. The Heir designate watched in horror as the Leopard collided with the spaceport, recognizing immediately that his uncle had intended for him to have been killed in the same crash as his father. Otter had only seconds to explain how he had known of the danger, convince the younger man of his peaceful intentions, and assure him that it was Marcus who had betrayed them both. He knew that his only hope of survival was if Kurita would look kindly on him for saving his life. Unfortunately for the governor, his prospective son-in-law was not willing to become embroiled in the plot. Only one of them would survive this day now. Also riding in the helicopter was Halstead, who had embarked along with the Heir almost without notice. Believing that Theodore had just inherited the chrysanthemum throne, he saw an opportunity to get in his new coordinator's good graces. When Kurita rejected Sjovold's offer, the other noble quite literally leapt at the opportunity presented him. Tackling the Jarl to the ground, he broke the man's neck and managed to plant a knife on him, insisting he had moved to kill the young dragon. As a reward for his selfless act, he was later elevated to the position of Archduke. Knowledge of his own participation in the Free Rasalhague Underground died along with its leader. In the aftermath, all of the plotters and their entire families were executed on Takashi's orders, dispassionately carried out by the man known as the Smiling One, the coordinator's longtime friend and director of the Internal Security Force, Sabash Indrahar. Among those sentenced to death was Theodore's betrothed, Anastasi. Ivan Sorensen was rewarded for his own actions, elevated to the rank of Taishu, and given command of the Razelhague military district. Against all odds, no evidence of Marcus Kurita's involvement was uncovered by the ISF, despite his shadow being clearly felt. In reality, they had been asked not to look too closely, so that the family name would not be besmirched. In a deft bit of politicking, he was isolated from the main body of his support within the Razelhague region via a promotion to DCMS Chief of Strategies. Theoretically, this was an appointment of equal prestige, but crucially, a role that he could only fulfill from Luthien, where he would be under close scrutiny. The grand wedding planned for September 23rd, 3019 may have ended in a terrible bloodbath, but in secret, another went ahead that same evening. Theodore Kurita married his second, Tai Tomoe Sakare. As well as being a fellow graduate from his class at the Sunzang MechWarrior Academy, she was also a member of the vaunted Order of the Five Pillars, a revelation she only admitted to that night. So it was that another of the Draconis Combine's great institutions came to back the heir to the dragon. With the assistance of both the ISF and O5P, Theodore was able to keep his personal life hidden from his father, who was continually frustrated when his son inevitably turned down every other proposal he arranged for him. This was not to be the last secret betrothal of the Third Succession War. Within the next few years, two of the great houses were first broaching the delicate issue. Such an alliance would have the potential to upend the balance of power within the Inner Sphere, and perhaps, after centuries of bloodshed, finally bring the Succession Wars to an end. We are one step closer to finishing the history of the Third Succession Wars and finally reaching the year 3025. I did end up splitting this one in two, as you can no doubt tell by now, but we had already passed an hour's worth of material before even reaching the 3020s, and I really didn't want another mega project just bringing all my momentum to a halt. This one was long enough, believe me. You can maybe tell from my voice, it's just completely wrecked after a 3+ hour recording session to get this done. But I'm glad to have it finished, and it's really feeling like we are getting towards the end now. I say the end, but of course it's not really. Every single video I put out, there's always dozens of comments asking me, oh, are you going to continue afterwards? And the answer is yes, definitely, obviously, why would I stop? That seems to be a genuine fear among some people that I'm just going to call it quits once we reach 3025. It was reading the Fourth Succession War sourcebooks that first gave me the idea of doing a kind of video history of the BattleTech universe, and my original desire was in fact to cover the Jihad and Dark Age eras to help bridge the gap between the people who are stuck in the old clan invasion and civil war era and get them up to the modern day Ill Clan era. Somewhere along the line though, I got a bit distracted and ended up doing a complete chronological history of the entire timeline, so Jihad and Dark Age are still quite a few years away at this stage. Regardless, I want to press ahead. I've got most of the next chapter, at least a first draft, written of the script. I'm going to need to go back and make changes and additions. I'm actually undecided at the time of recording this how or where I'm going to end the next episode. I already know I want the battle for Galtor to be the finale. So the question is, what do I do with Operation Doppelganger and Stein's Folly? Now that planet first falls just before Galtor and then is reclaimed just afterwards, so the events of Operation Doppelganger are kind of concurrent to it. All of those events make up part of the final year of the Third Succession War. But they aren't really the reason that conflict comes to a close. That's more because of the Fedcom alliance and the fact that Galtor just totally exhausts the two most powerful militaries. The two obvious options I've got would be to A, just include it at the end of the next episode as I originally planned, since it does take place in the final year, or I could make the battle for Galtor into a 3025 video and cover both of those significant engagements together. And I think there are a few other minor raids in 3025. But in my mind, that kind of dilutes it. I'd rather keep Galtor very focused, like I did for Anton's Revolt. But the third option that's occurred to me in recent days is that I actually don't mention Doppelganger at all. I just talk about the fact that Stein's Folly was conquered by the Capellans and then later retaken. And it's only once we get to the 4th Succession War that I open with Operation Doppelganger and what went on with Hansa Davion. I'm reminded of the fact that when I started the 2nd Succession War series, I opened with the death of Jerome Blake in 2819. Now that was an event that took place in the final 2 or 3 years of the 1st Succession War, and a few people pointed out that I'd forgotten to mention it, but I hadn't. It was always my intention to tie it in to the beginning of the 2nd Succession War, because that is the reason, in large part, that that conflict took place. And it is the same again with Operation Doppelganger. Now the 4th Succession War, one way or the other, was going to happen, but the reason Hansa Davion made the decision that he did was because of what had happened in 3025. And that's why I'm thinking that event would tie better into the next series we work on. I think that third option is probably what I'm leaning towards, and the only thing that might stop it is if the next chapter ends up being really short, sub 40 minutes let's say, in which case then I probably will end up making it a significant chunk of the final part of that chapter. You can let me know what you think, I'm always open to feedback. I've not too much else to say about this video really. We covered a number of events that are important not so much to the kind of grander inner sphere politics, but more to a number of characters that become central in the novels. In fact, we're starting to reach the very beginning of the BattleTech novels, now we're getting into the 3010s. On the topic of books, I'm just about to reach the Twilight of the Clans series, the 8-parter octology, if that's even a word. A few years back I made a guide to help people with a reading order for the BattleTech novels, at least those set during the Succession Wars era, and a number of people have asked me to make another for the Clan Invasion era. That's a much larger task. I think there's 3, perhaps even 4 times as many books in the Clan Invasion era as there are for the original Succession Wars run, but I'm very nearly through them now. So hopefully you will see another video on that topic later in the year, probably right towards the end, November-December time. I don't want to think about things that far away though, so for now I will say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed the video today. If you did, you can give the video a like, please leave a comment below, I love reading them all, I try to respond to as many of you as I can. It really makes all the effort that goes into these videos worth it when I see how much people have enjoyed them. And of course, I enjoy getting to discuss all these nerdy topics with y'all. If you know anyone else who's a BattleTech fan or just getting into the series and you think they might find this interesting, be sure to share the videos around with them as well. If you want to be more direct in your support, I do have a Patreon linked in the description. I always try to post the videos there a few days early, and you can see progress updates on what I'm working on. That's everything for today. Thank you again for watching, and I'll hope to see you soon for another video.